Imagine being so bad that one of the greatest players in your country's history hates you. The Brazil national team has been under fire recently, and it's down to the fact that they've been underperforming for years now. Quite simply, the fans are tired of watching. Crazy, because all the beginning, it wasn't like this. There used to be a global house that's always dominated matches. Dating back to the early 1900s, the Brazil national team was one of the early teams that introduced a unique brand of football to the game. Heck, they even participated in the first World Cup in 1930. By 1949, they'd won 2 South American championships. But it was the World Cup of 1950 that put them on a global scale. On home soil, they made it to the final at the Maracanã. Up to that point, Brazil had never won the trophy, but this was the ultimate chance to rewrite all of that on home turf too. Unfortunately though, it wasn't meant to be. Despite taking a 1-0 lead early on, Uruguay came from a goal down to win it 2-1 and shocked Brazil in the process. Still, that was a turning point for Brazilians all round, because after watching their team get all the way to the finals, they knew there was something in that team worth getting behind for. And so from then on, the support of the national team matches grew. At the 1954 World Cup, Brazil entered the tournament as favourites given the performance from the previous edition. But after losing to Hungary in the quarter-finals, it was clear there was work to be done. And by the time the next edition rolled around in 1958, Brazil looked completely different. The start of a new era for football. The Joga Bonito. Players like Zito, Garrincha, and Vava made the team, but the real headline maker was a 17-year-old wonder kid who was fast becoming one of the best talents in the world. Pelé. Pelé used the 1958 World Cup as a launching pad, not just for his career, but also for Brazil. His 4 goals in the tournament, including 2 in the final, helped Brazil beat Sweden 5-2, to not only win the competition for the first time, but also to become the first country to win the World Cup outside home turf at the time. Pelé had now put Brazil on the map, and from that point on, leading up to the late 90s, they dominated. By the time 1998 rolled around, Brazil had gone from a team full of promise to an absolute powerhouse. 4 World Cup titles in the bag and 5 Copa America titles, Brazil was now the team to beat on the world stage. They came into the 1998 edition as World Cup champions, but you see, the previous edition from 1994 showed a crack in the unity behind the national team that laid the foundations for the hate they're getting today. Brazil won the competition in 1994, but not with the full support of the country behind them. Up to that point, Brazil had now transitioned into creating a style of football that was unique to them, the Joga Bonito, Samba Boys. The national team was made up of players with incredible flair and the ability to excite teams. Winning wasn't enough. They wanted to do things that would get the crowd up on its feet during matches, and make fans and spectators who came into the stadium get their money's worth. It wasn't the case in 1994 though. If anything, they took a cautious approach and attitude into matches. It ultimately gave them the result. They won the competition on penalties after beating Italy. But the truth is, had Italy had luck on their side, they could have easily won it as well. It was rare for the fans to see a Brazil team sitting back and defending for large parts of matches. They were so used to the team always playing on the front foot that watching them like this felt odd. By 1998, the hate watch grew. Brazil made it to the final of the World Cup in France, and against the host country, the home crowd was against them. Still, Brazil had history on their side. They'd been at the stage of the competition more times than anyone else at that point, and knew what it would take to win. With players like Ronaldo Nazario, Rivaldo, and Cafu in the team, beating the French would have been hard but also realistic. However, they quite simply were no match for a dominant French team. Lost the final 3-0. The hate watch was officially on. Still, Brazil bounced back. Winning the first edition of the Confederations Cup a year earlier had given a sense of pride to the team, and so the defeat was only mirrored by a section of fans. And so by the time 2002 rolled along, Brazil was once again ready to dominate. Made up of players like Ronaldo Nazario, Ronaldinho, Rivaldo, Kaká, Edmilson, Roberto Carlos, this Brazil team looked complete. And that's because they were. They swept aside the opposition in the group stages, easily winning all 3 games. Defeated Belgium in the round of 16, England in the quarter-finals, and Turkey in the semi-finals. And in the final against Germany, Ronaldo's brace settled it. Brazil had now become champions of the world. A 5th World Cup title, another star on the national team's jersey crest. Brazil was unmatched. They were now the undisputed kings of football on the global stage. and had the best players in the world too. Unfortunately though, this was where it peaked for Brazil. Unknowingly to them at the time, the team they put out in Yokohama against Germany would be the last ones to lift that trophy for a long time, and what followed next was a period of proper confusion and hate. They won the 2004 Copa America Championships and the 2005 Confederations Cup, with emerging talents like Luis Adriano ready to take over and become the next generation of Brazilians ready to lead the team. 2006 should have been the year. A star-studded show in Germany was featuring some of the best teams in the world. But even at that, Brazil still entered this one as defending champions and favourites to win, once again winning all 3 group stage matches as they had in 2002. But in the quarter-finals, Thierry Henry made the difference and Brazil was stunned. They were out of the World Cup. The barest minimum was at least making it to the semis. They'd failed to do it now, and the Brazilian FA had no choice. Coach Carlos Alberto Pereira was sacked, and his replacement, Dunga, immediately understood the assignment. The national team was built to win with the brand of football they played, nothing else. By 2010, Brazil entered the World Cup finals in South America on good form. They'd won the Copa America under Dunga in 2007 and won another Confederations Cup title in 2009 in the host country South Africa for the World Cup. So coming here now, it was full of hope. Brazil's team for the showpiece event was a mix of the old and the new. Players like Ronaldinho still made the team, but there was also emerging talent like Robinho, Luis Fabiano Clemente and Anderson all making their World Cup debuts. They won the first 2 matches of the group to seal qualification, beating North Korea and the Ivory Coast, then drew against Portugal in the last group stage game, but claimed enough points to win the group. And in the round of 16 against Chile, they easily dispatched their fellow South American rivals 3-0 to set up a quarter-final match with the Dutch. But unfortunately, this was as far as they got. After Robinho put them in front, Brazil choked on the lead to lose 2-1 and suffer a second straight World Cup quarter-final exit. The trend was developing here. The FA and the fans had the same view. Managing Brazil was no easy task, and it came with its downsides too. After the elimination from the competition, Coach Dunga was sacked, and his replacement, Mano Menezes, couldn't get off to a worse competition start. Unlike Dunga, Menezes failed to secure the Copa America. They got knocked out in the quarter-finals by Paraguay, and months later, Menezes was gone. 2013 now, and ahead of the World Cup, it was the dark days for Brazil. They were now ranked 22nd in the world, for a team that had won 5 World Cups and over 7 Copa America titles. This was one of the lowest points in the country's history. But on the plus side, they had the perfect chance to redeem that because the World Cup that year was going to be played on home soil. Brazil were the confirmed hosts. Before the World Cup though, the Confederations Cup came along in 2013, and honestly, I remember Brazil playing some of the best football I'd ever seen. They won all 5 matches on their way to lifting the trophy in Rio, and in the final against Spain, the hype around this one was building to a real heavyweight clash. At this point, Spain had come to replace Brazil as the dominant force in international football. They'd won the Euros, World Cup, and Euros again in succession. 3 international trophies in 4 years. And they had a chance to make it 4 in 5 when they got to the final ready to take on Brazil. For the Brazilians, this match was going to be a proper test of just how ready they were for the World Cup. The Jogo Bonito versus the tiki-taka football Spain enjoyed, and in the end, Brazil's class came through. 3-0 stole the show. It seemed like the Brazilian team was back, and now they had players who knew what it meant to represent the national team, and had a mixture of youth and experience too. Guys like Thiago Silva and David Luiz were about to enter their prime years, and midfielders like Luis Gustavo, Fernandinho and Ramirez were all solids in their respective teams. In attack, they had Fred, who was convincing the haters he could do the damage by claiming the Golden Boot at the Confederations Cup, with a joint record of 5 goals in the competition. And at the center of it all was their 22-year-old superstar, Neymar. He was the joy of Brazil. At the time, he had just completed a $57 million move to Barcelona after making his mark at Santos. He scored in the final to help the team win the Copa Libertadores since the days of Pelé. And more importantly, he showed the fans how to get the best content on YouTube by subscribing to Mr. Football. Neymar was the diamond of the team, and so when 2014 rolled around, with him as the centerpiece, Brazil entered the competition confident and started like a house on fire. They won their opening game against Croatia 3-1, coming from behind thanks to Neymar's brace. They then beat Cameroon to seal qualification, with Neymar getting another 2 goals, drew against Mexico to finish the group as winners, and in the round of 16 against Chile, it was very nervy stuff that went to penalties. But in the end, with the home crowd behind them, Brazil advanced. The quarterfinals came along and Brazil beat Colombia 2-1 to seal a semi-final spot with Germany. But this win came at a huge cost, because in the game against Colombia, they'd lost their diamond. Neymar injured his back and was ruled out of the competition. The doctors even told him he'd be lucky to walk again, let alone play. Captain Thiago Silva was also suspended for the match against Germany, and so Brazil entered this one with a team that looked depleted and affected by the loss of their 2 key players. Even though they tried to hide it, everyone could see how shaken they were, including their opponents. And what happened next was one of the darkest days in the country's history. The 7-1 defeat was unthinkable. It had never happened before. The entire Brazil cried that evening. See, guys, this was a turning point in Brazil's history, because it was at this point that the fans finally understood that the eras had changed. They were no longer that all-dominating team they used to be in the 90s and early 2000s. As Germany had just shown by embarrassing them, the tide had turned, and Brazil had to begin Project Rebuild now. By 2016, they had a chance to bounce back, and the script was written perfectly for this one. The Olympics was being hosted by Brazil as well, and when it came to men's football, despite all their big achievements in the past, they'd never won gold in the Olympics before. Neymar was back now. He was in sensational form for Barcelona, and he so badly wanted to make up for his lost time at the World Cup that he was named captain of the Olympics men team for the Euros. And in the final against Germany, he got his moment. The match went to a shootout, and after a German miss, Neymar had the chance to rewrite history and win Olympic gold for the national team, and he made no mistake from the spot. Scored the goal to make Brazil Olympic champions for the first time in the country's history. It's important to note now, guys, that despite this win, the Brazilian national team was in a state of confusion. There was no balance now. They won the Olympics in 2016, yes, but 1 year earlier in the Copa America, they lost in the round of 16 to Paraguay. And in the Copa America Centenario, 1 year later, it was even worse. They failed to advance from the group stage for the first time since 1987. The team was different now, and perhaps this was what made fans even more sad. The Brazilian teams of old had always been made up of flair-talented players that could stand out in any league. The team they had now, according to some sections of fans, didn't look as intimidating or dominating as the previous ones. The 2018 World Cup was a chance to avenge that. Brazil hadn't won the competition since 2002, 16 years now, and looking back now, the competition in Russia was a repetition of the same problems. Brazil once again finished top of their group. They began the competition with a 1-1 draw against a less fancied Switzerland team, then won the next 2 group games against Costa Rica and Serbia to seal qualification from the group. The performances weren't exactly up to standard. Take for instance the 2-0 win against Costa Rica. The game was leveled up until the 91st minute, when Coutinho broke the deadlock before Neymar added a second to seal the win. They easily beat Mexico 2-0 in the round of 16 to make it to the quarterfinals. And that's where they came up against their first proper big test of the competition, a Belgium team ready to make a mark on the global stage. As far back as 2010, Belgium wouldn't even have been in the same conversation with Brazil. But the year was 2018 now, and as the Brazil team dipped in quality, the Belgian team had improved. And by the end of the 90, the scoreline was evident for all to see. 2-1, Belgium beat Brazil and knocked them out of the competition. The FA decided to remain with Tite despite the defeat, and in 2019 on home soil, he guided them to another Copa America title. This was the case now on a continental level. Brazil had no problems performing, but when it came to mixing it with the big teams around the world, they were now struggling. Another male Olympic gold medal followed in 2021, but perhaps the biggest underperformance of the lot was 2021, when on home turf they failed to perform in a major competition again. The Copa America final, and for the first time since 2005, Brazil was facing Argentina in the final stage of the competition. History was on Brazil's side. They always win against Argentina, but that year was just bound to be Messi's year. And on home turf, Brazil tried as hard as they could. but Argentina did them one better. Argentina finally won a national trophy for the first time in 28 years, at the expense of Brazil. The storyline made for good reading if you were from Argentina, but any Brazil watching could see the cracks in the team. Neymar's first appearance in a Copa America final ended in tears. The guys who rarely ever won were now winning, and in 2022 it reached its peak. See guys, the rivalry between Brazil and Argentina goes way back. From the days of Pele and Maradona to Messi and Neymar, it had always been a battle of which team could outdo the other on a global stage. A battle Brazil used to win for years, but now the tide had turned. At the 2022 World Cup, Brazil finished first in the group with 2 wins out of 3. A 1-0 defeat to an already eliminated Cameroon team was the dark spot. And in the round of 16, they easily swept past South Korea 4-2 to book a quarter-final spot with Croatia. On paper, the Brazilian team should have easily been tearing that Croatian team to shreds, but on the field, Croatia was more than decent. They were the runners-up from the previous edition, and came into the match against Brazil with nothing to lose. For Brazil, on the other hand, the pressure had now mounted on its superstars like Neymar and Thiago Silva to deliver. The chances of playing another World Cup after this would be incredibly slim, so this one had to count. The game was tight until minutes towards the end of extra time. Neymar found a way past the Croatian defense and thought he had won it, but just before the end, Croatia found a leveler, forced the game to penalties, and in that moment, Brazil crumbled. A defeat in the penalty shootout, Brazil out. Since 2002, they'd only gotten to the semi-finals once in 5 editions. The team was no longer what it used to be, and now the hate on Brazil was real. The question is, why? Well, to begin with, the success of the previous years put a lot of pressure on the new generation. Most people of this age assume that Brazil has gone into every tournament as a powerhouse. But it's easy to forget that just like every other team, they had to grind their way to the top and establish themselves at it. Brazil has always been a country full of talented players, but the pressure to win from the fans and the media must have gotten to them. For instance, a player like Neymar, it's quite easy to say he's underperformed on the national team level. The only thing he's got to show for it is an Olympic gold medal from 2016. On the other side though, Neymar's the country's all-time top scorer, and that says something given that the guys before him were the likes of Pele and Ronaldo Nazario. The constant change in management didn't help as well. Looking at the most successful national teams in history, it's always been a manager with patterns that are constant, and an evolution of players who fit the system. Spain won the 2008 Euros, the 2010 World Cup, and the 2012 Euros with the same manager. They trusted his tactics and gave him time to develop the right players. Argentina under Lionel Scaloni did the same thing too. After winning the 2021 Copa America, they won the Finalissima trophy by beating Italy in the final at Wembley. And in 2022, they won the World Cup. The Portuguese national is another example of what waiting on the right manager does. Under Fernando Santos, they broke their national team duct of not having won a major trophy by winning the Euros in 2016 and the Nations League in 2019. Brazil, however, has been chop and change. Winning the Copa America isn't enough for whoever is in charge. A solid performance at the World Cup is a must too. It also feels like there's pressure on the current crop of players in the team to perform. Take, for instance, a player like Vinicius Jr. When he plays for Real Madrid, he's one of the best players in the world. But for Brazil, most time it feels like he's part of a team trying to force his way in. The same applies to players like Rafinha and Rodrigo Goes. When they play okay, they're great. Anything less and it's almost as if they don't belong in the team. Ronaldinho came out to say his stunt about not supporting the national team was a PR move to gather support for the team. But deep down, that's a statement that some Brazilians agree with. Some believe this current team doesn't have the flair like the Brazilians of old used to. Add this to the fact that they dominated for years and have now been knocked off their perch, it's easy to see why everyone wants to have a go at them. Former champions trying to get back. The Copa America is currently ongoing, and after a disappointing draw to Costa Rica in the opening game, they bounced back to beat Paraguay 4-1. In this win, there were signs of that Brazilian style of play on display. Neymar was on hand to support the team too, as he's always done. And when it comes to the guy, the one who was supposed to be king, it's a shame what happened to him. You can check out how he fell off by hitting the next video to see the tragic end of Neymar.